Hello everyone, welcome to the Voice of Dr. Yan. I'm your host, Dr. Limeng Yan. In this episode, we bring one guest who you may be familiar with if you read articles from New York Post or you have listened to the very early beginning back to mid-2022 when I started the Voice of Dr. Yan broadcast. He was one of my first guests at that time. His name is Steve W. Mosher. And Steve Mosher is an internationally recognized authority on China and population issues, as well as an acclaimed author speaker. He is the founder and president of Population Research Institute in U.S. He has worked tirelessly since 1979 to fight coercive population control programs and has helped hundreds of thousands of women and families worldwide over the years. In 1979, Stephen was the first American social scientist to visit mainland China. He was invited there by the Chinese government, where he had access to government documents and actually witnessed women being forced to have abortions under the new one-child policy. Mr. Mosher was a pro-choice ethicist at that time, but witnessing these traumatic abortions led him to reconsider his convictions and to eventually become a practicing pro-life Roman Catholic. Steve has appeared numerous times before Congress as an expert in world population, China, and human rights abuses. He was also made TV appearance on Good Morning America, 60 Minutes, The Today Show, 2020, Fox and CNN News, as well as being a regular guest on talk radio shows across the nation. He is also the author of the best-selling A Mother's Ordeal, One Woman's Fight Against China's One-Child Policy. Other books, including Hegemon, China's Plan to Dominate Asia and the World, China Attacks, China Misperceived American Illusions and Chinese Reality, Journey to the Forbidden China, and Broken Earth, The Rural Chinese. Actually, he has a new book recently on Amazon, which we will talk about it soon. So, sir, you have also been the journalist that appears in Wall Street Journal, Reader's Digest, the New Public, the Washington Post, the National Review, Reasons, Asian Wall Street Journal, Freedom Review, and New York Post, all like this. And first, welcome you go back to my broadcast. And I really want you to let our audience to know or remind why your experience and insights are so special and your understanding of China could be so deep, far above most of American China experts on China, on the nature of the communist China, and why you can be the first social scientist went to China and what happened after that. You said you converted. Could you let our people know these interesting stories in your life? Thank you.
Well, before I talk about me and my experience, I want to talk about you and your experience because you are one of my heroes, Dr. Yen. You are a truth teller. And I think Americans would be surprised at how few truth tellers there really are in the world. There are very few people who are willing to sacrifice their career, who are willing to sacrifice their future for the sake of pursuing and telling and being a witness to the truth. And you, at great personal cost and great personal danger, came from China, the occupied part of China called Hong Kong, occupied now by the Chinese Communist Party, to the United States to tell the truth about the origins of the coronavirus that causes COVID-19. And all Americans should be grateful to you, and all Americans should be tuning into your show if they want to find out what's really happening on the other side of the world in China, because you know China, having from the inside out. You know it from having grown up in China under the misrule of the Chinese Communist Party. So people should listen to you. You are a voice of truth, a voice of reason, and we'd be better off for having listened to you and followed what you say. So again, I have great admiration for you, Dr. Yan.
Thank you so much, sir. So appreciate.
So back to my story. Well, I was a young naval officer a long time ago, stationed in Japan, and I became fascinated with the Orient. I learned Japanese. I resigned my commission in the Navy and went to the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I completed the Chinese language course there. I learned Mandarin in school, and I learned Cantonese on the streets. So, so I came back to the United States and went to Stanford University on a National Science Foundation fellowship. And when we normalized, the United States normalized diplomatic relations with China on January 15th of 1979. I was in China by March of 1979 because people in the China field thought, here's someone who can speak, read and write Chinese, and we should send him. So I was picked as a very junior scholar to go to China. Now, the Chinese Communist Party did not like the idea of my being in China, and they initially turned down my research. They said, we want America to send nuclear physicists and chemical engineers, and we will even tolerate historians and linguists, but we don't want a curious social scientist wandering around the country talking to the people of China. So they turned down my research. It was only after former President Jimmy Carter had a meeting with Deng Xiaoping, and he brought up my research. And he said, would it be all right if this American scholar, Stephen Mosher, came to China? And Deng Xiaoping said, it won't be a problem. 没有问题. And after Deng Xiaoping said, it won't be a problem, it wasn't a problem. All barriers disappeared. I went and lived in the Pearl River Delta in a commune called Junan Commune, which is a perfect name for a commune because it's equality commune, right? Junan, and equality peace. So I lived there for a year. I did not have anyone from the Communist Party watching me. I was able to talk freely with the people. And they told me some amazing things. They told me that as soon as the Red Army had arrived in the village in 1950, they had taken out the members of the Nationalist Party and the old village leaders to a local hill called Xiaoguishan, Little Turtle Mountain, and shot them. Execution. The second thing they did was they executed anyone found with a weapon. So if you had a rifle or a gun, you were shot by the People's Liberation Army. They took me out to a field outside the village, a mass grave, where 200 people were buried. Those were the people who died during the famine after the Great Leap Forward from 1960 to 1962. They told me about cannibalism during the Cultural Revolution, the eating of human flesh, caused again by the rampaging Red Guards. They told me about all the purges and persecutions over the years. And they told me something really astonishing. They told me that life had been better in 1949, before the communists came, than it was in 1979 and 1980. In other words, they said there's been virtually no progress in the last 30 years. We're worse off in many ways than we were before, because before we had our own land. Some people owned a little more. They were called landlords or rich peasants. But now we are all slaves of the big landlord, Da Diju. And of course, that's that's the worst thing you can say about someone, right? In communist China, that he was a landlord. My goodness, he was exploiting the masses. Well, the people of the village, the commune I was living in, called the Communist Party the big landlord, which is all you need to know about their view of the Chinese Communist Party. And then, Dr. Yan, the one-child policy began. And I knew about the policy as soon as it hit my commune, because the local village party secretary, who was a friend of mine, came over the day he received the directive from the Central Committee of the Guangdong Provincial Communist Party. And the directive said that there were too many people in Guangdong province being born, and that the local officials were to ensure that the population of Guangdong did not increase by more than 1% in the year 1980. This was March of 1980. So I looked at Secretary He and I said, "You know it takes 9 months to conceive and bear a child." He said, "Yes." I said, "So if you're starting a campaign to keep the birth rate down now, you're going to have to be forcing women to get abortions." And he said, "Oh, yes." He said, "That's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to do house-to-house search of the commune and identify all the women who are pregnant with second and third and fourth children. And we're going to tell them they must get an abortion. We're going to tell them that their children, their unborn children, are a danger to the future of China. That we're going to tell them that if they want a great China, if they want China to prosper and development, that for the good of the country, for the good of the party, for the good of the commune, they must sacrifice their children." And that's exactly what they did. They arrested 18 women in my village who refused to get abortions. They took them to the local commune headquarters and locked them up for days or weeks, however long it took to force them to get an abortion. And then at the end of the day, they took them all one by one to the local medical clinic, which for a couple of months was doing nothing but doing abortions and sterilizations. They stopped treating other diseases because the small clinic was filled. Every bed was filled with a young woman, usually in their early 20s, 21, 22, 23, 25, who had been given lethal injections into the womb to kill their unborn children. Most of these women were, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months pregnant. And then the operating room was busy from morning to night with doctors doing cesarean section abortions. They were performing cesarean sections, opening up these young women like tin cans, opening them up and then removing the now dead and dying babies. Well, I was there in the lockup when these women were told they had no choice, they had to get an abortion. I was there when they were crying and sobbing over the loss of their child. I was there in the clinic when they were being given the lethal injections. And the death watch was 24 to 48 hours before their unborn child would die from the poison. And I was in the operating room when they were being given cesarean section abortions. And so I saw with my own eyes what the abortion of an 8 and 9 month unborn child looks like. This was pure evil. But the Communist Party thrives on evil. It really feeds on evil. I think the basic animating principle of communism, certainly of Marx and Lenin, was hatred of God. And underneath all of their economic pretensions and their political claims and so forth is a hatred of the good, the true, and the beautiful, a hatred of God. And it feeds on, the system feeds on evil. It always has to have a target. It always has to have an enemy. Because that's the way it maintains the muscular tone of the system. That's the way you keep the system tuned, like you keep an engine tuned to run properly, right? You have to constantly feed victims into the system in order to keep the system working at top efficiency. So there's always a target. And in the early days, it was the landlords or the capitalists. And later on, it was the reactionaries. It was the rightists in 57, 58. And in the commune system, it was anyone who objected to being forced into a commune and having their land taken away from them. After that, the Cultural Revolution, it was anyone, the four olds, anyone who had foreign contacts, anyone who had an education, anyone in a position of authority who opposed Chairman Mao. But then the biggest target group of all, Dr. Yan, were the unborn. Because while these other campaigns had killed millions, or maybe 10 million or 20 million, the one-child policy killed, according to the Chinese Communist Party, 400 million. So the unborn, from 1980, when I was in China, to 2016, were the target of the communist killing machine, and they were killed in huge numbers. And I make the point that in the book, The Devil in Communist China, that if you include all of the people killed during the Chinese Civil War, all of the people killed during the famines and the purges and persecutions and the Cultural Revolution, it probably comes up to 100 million. And then to add to that, the 400 million unborn children who were killed, many late in pregnancy, some at birth with lethal injections. That's a death toll caused by the Chinese Communist Party of 500 million. That's a truly astonishing, it's a truly horrible, barbaric, ghastly number. That's why I call the Chairman Mao the killingest man in human history, because he killed more human beings than any other, and the Chinese Communist Party, the biggest killing machine in human history. It feeds on death and destruction.
Into this abortion policy in China to see how people suffer from them. You know so much, you understand their language, you can communicate with them. Why would China allow you to do that? And if not, what is Chinese government's attitude towards you?
Well, why would the Chinese government choose to embark on the one-child policy? Well, there was, beginning in the late 1960s in the West, this huge propaganda campaign about overpopulation. There were books published by people like Paul Ehrlich, my former colleague at Stanford University, called The Population Bomb, in which he said we were having so many babies, we were breeding ourselves off the planet, and that by the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people were going to starve to death in massive famines because we couldn't afford to feed them all. Well, it was in the late 1970s, after the death of Chairman Mao, that China opened up to the West. And for the first time, Chinese scholars were allowed to travel to the West, to the United States, to Europe. And one of them, a rocket engineer named Song Jian, came back with a copy of The Population Bomb, with a copy of a book called The Limits to Growth, which argued that Western countries, in order to stop environmental and economic collapse, had to stop population growth. And he went to Deng Xiaoping. He had very good connections with the top leadership because he'd helped design ICBMs. And he said, you know, the West is embarking on population control because we're going to run out of resources by the 1990s. Here's the latest study. And he showed him the limits to growth, which turned out to be a fraud. But Deng Xiaoping said yes. Apparently, the West is going to be controlling its population. We need to control our population. And they decided that the ideal population of China would be 600 million. And they needed to stop population growth. And so Deng Xiaoping said to engineer Song Jian, how do we get there? And he said, well, I think we need to have a one-child policy. And so the old men who ruled China, Deng Xiaoping and his colleagues, decided that they were going to limit everyone to one child based on this false myth of overpopulation propagated by the West. So that's the origin of the one-child policy. The result, of course, was not only morally bankrupt. The result was not only the death of 400 million unborn children. The result was not only the highest suicide rate in the world among Chinese women who were mourning the loss of their children. The result was not only the destruction of families and the tearing apart of social society. The result is now clear, is going to be economically devastating, because China, because of the misguided, wrong-headed, mistaken one-child policy, is now in absolute demographic decline. It is filling more coffins than cradles each year in the country. There are more people dying in China than are being born. And it's very difficult to see how the Communist Party will ever turn this around, because for 40 years they've been telling people in China, for the good of China, for the good of the party, for the good of the country, for the good of China's future, for economic development, you must limit yourself to one child. And now, having done that for 40 years, we have young Chinese who aren't interested in getting married, aren't interested in having children. And so what is the Communist Party going to do? Well, I'm afraid that the Communist Party will do exactly what it did in 1980, only in reverse, Dr. Yan. Instead of ordering young people, instead of arresting young women for the crime of being pregnant, instead of arresting young women for the crime of being pregnant, they're going to tell young women they must get pregnant. I'm afraid what we will see is forced pregnancy in China before too long.
Also, you really gave very good topics, so we may not have enough time to discuss it further in this episode. But yes, when we talk about one-child policy, since you came to China, that's even before I was born. And then it lasted until very recent years. Basically, at the beginning of 2019, I think people just started to get used to the new policy that, you could have second baby. And then soon, now, it comes to 3 babies. So what it means, it doesn't mean you have freedom of your own baby numbers in China. It means that previously only 1 is allowed, and then in the around 2016 to 2020 that you are allowed to have 2 and encourage you to have 2. Now 3, but they didn't mention over 3 yet. So still you need to think about if you have over 3, that could be illegal and you need to pay the fines. And also people really are talking about to punish those who don't want the kids. And all these things, if the government wants, they can control all the women. Now what they are worried about is they know that they realize young generation also understand the poor economy and China going down. And the Chinese Communist Party is so corrupted, people are struggling to life. These are all described in your new article on New York Post that they don't find a job, they can't make a good living. So people don't want to get married and have a baby because the cost is so expensive in China, much higher than they need to spend in the United States even. So government start to launch a lot of policy propaganda, try to intimidate people if they don't want to get married or get a baby, and try to force them to do it, especially in the, we call the system. That means people who work for the government, in the government-related system, public school, public hospital, these staffs, they get more pressure because if you don't do that, they would give you trouble and you may lose your job and you may lose your retired salary. So, sir, you gave a very good question, and we want to discuss about your new article. Communist China had a good run, but the party is over. And that was published on New York Post basically at the end of March, but it really attract so much attention. I see a lot of comments, shares about this article because you linked Mao Zedong, the huge killer, serial killer in human history, top 1, to Xi Jinping. Actually, he's also one of the top killers. Just think about COVID-19. All over the world, according to some data, that 20 million people dead. So we really don't know who will be the top 1 serial killer until the end of Xi Jinping's regime. But we all know that there are a lot of similarity, and you pointed it out. So we are going to talk about this section after a short break in the next section. But anyway, before that, let me give people one more example of the one-child policy and forced abortion. My mom told me, I'm the only child at home, the first and the only. My mom said the night she gave birth of me in a big public hospital in my hometown, Qingdao, there were another 2 ladies, also 20s, in the same ward. They all want to deliver the baby at the same night. However, they deliver each of them deliver 1 baby in front of me, but I'm the only survived kid among 3 because one lady, she had one kid already, so it's illegal to have the second one. Another lady didn't get married, so she was illegal to have any baby.
Yes.
And
Yes.
my mom was forced to say both babies were killed in front of them, that the babies were alive, but after they get out because they are too big to get surgery for mom, after they were born, alive babies were injected with some poison to the top of the head and
Exactly.
killed. You know that, right? They're killed immediately.
Absolutely. Here's what happens. If a woman in China under the one-child policy was going into labor and she went to the hospital and the hospital discovered that the baby was illegal because she didn't have a permission slip to give birth, the doctors were under orders to kill the baby at birth. And so they would wait until the baby was born or the baby's head was coming out, and then they would give a lethal injection, sometimes of alcohol, sometimes of formaldehyde, into the fontanelle, the soft spot at the top of the baby's head, directly into the brain. And of course, the baby would die of convulsions within seconds or minutes. This is infanticide. This was happening all over China. And so what your mother witnessed was not an isolated case. Doctors were under orders not to allow illegal children to be born and to kill babies at birth. And sadly, that's what happened again and again and again. I think over the course of many years, I think
Yes.
millions of babies were probably killed in this way at birth. This is murder.
Yes, sir. So my mom was so scared, and she said her only idea at that time was, if they made mistake, thought I'm illegal, then I will be killed too. And luckily, they know. I mean, they didn't make mistake. But my mom said those doctor and nurse, when they kill the baby, it's very routine practical for them. It's like they are used to that very well. And when they turn to my mom, they're still the nice doctor, nice nurse that, oh, don't worry, assure mom, not be nervous. And hey, see, you have a nice kid. So these kind of things, I mean, this is a very psycho picture if you imagine it. But this is how communist China pushed the people to get into such psycho status. You killed the babies 10 seconds before and then turn to the next lady and said, you are nice, you're great, oh, you will have a new kid. I can't always think about that. This is so terrible. So, sir, let's have a short rest and we will go back, continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.